At 18, she was given to a solitary Apache for a horse, and endless nights in the warrior's arms. Her family's small homestead was carved out of the rugged land, where the sun blazed down in the day and the nights grew cold and lonely. From the earliest age, she had known the hard work of survival. Her mornings began before sunrise, fetching water from the well and tending to the small patch of crops her family managed to grow. Her evenings were filled with the smell of wood smoke from the hearth and the soft murmurs of her mother and father planning for the coming days. Life was simple, but it was not easy. Every day was a test of strength and endurance, and Clara had learned to move quietly, to notice the small signs of danger in the desert, and to keep her fears to herself. At 18, Clara was no longer a child. She was tall for her age, with eyes that had grown wise far too early. People in her small settlement often whispered about her beauty, though it was the kind of beauty born of the sun and the wind, not polished in mirrors or ribbons. Her hair was dark and thick, often tangled from the wind that swept across the open land. Her hands, calloused from work, could mend fences, cook meals, and sew clothing with equal skill. She knew the language of survival, but she had not yet learned the full cruelty of the world outside her homestead. It was early in the spring when the trader came. Clara remembered him as a man who smelled of dust and horses, with a face lined by too many years under the sun. He carried with him promises of trade and prosperity, but also danger. Her father had greeted him politely, as he always did with outsiders, wary but hoping for a good deal. That day, the trader spoke of horses and supplies, of the rising tensions between the settlers and the Apache. At first, Clara did not understand the weight of his words. She only knew that her father frowned more than once, his hands tightening around the edge of the table as he listened. Then came the shocking words. In exchange for a prized horse, Clara was to live with a solitary Apache warrior. She remembered the moment as if it were frozen in time. The air seemed to thicken around her, and her heart pounded in a way she had never felt before. Fear, confusion, and disbelief swirled together like a storm inside her chest. She wanted to scream, to run, to demand that this could not be real, but there was no escape. Her father's eyes were sad, yet resigned, and her mother's lips pressed tightly together, betraying the worry she could not voice. Clara realized then that this was a decision made long before she had a say. It was the harsh reality of life in a land where survival often outweighed mercy. The days that followed were filled with preparation, though Clara could barely focus. She packed a small bundle of clothes, a few personal items, and the token of her childhood that she could not part with, a small wooden carving her father had made for her when she was a girl. Each item she placed carefully in her bag felt heavier than it should, as if the weight of her uncertain future rested upon them. Her family treated her with quiet reverence, their hands brushing hers with unspoken love and regret. They could not change the deal, could not undo the path that had been set. Clara understood, though it did little to comfort her. When the day arrived, the sun hung low in the sky, casting long shadows across the desert. Clara's heart raced as she was led toward the place where she would meet the Apache warrior. The journey itself was short, but every step felt like a mile. Her mind spun with questions. Who was he? What would he expect of her? How could life change so suddenly, as if she were a piece of property rather than a living, breathing human being? The questions pressed on her, yet she dared not speak them aloud. Fear had a way of silencing everything else. At last, she saw him. The warrior stood alone, a figure both intimidating and majestic, framed by the golden light of the setting sun. His clothing was simple, made of tanned hides, and his dark hair fell loosely around his shoulders. He did not speak at first. His eyes, dark and unreadable, seemed to look through her, seeing her fear, her curiosity, and perhaps something else she could not identify. Clara noticed the way he moved, slowly, deliberately, every motion controlled and measured. There was a strength in him that made her heart tighten, a presence that demanded respect even as it inspired fear. The initial silence between them was heavy. Clara wanted to retreat, to shrink back into herself, but she could not. The warrior spoke only a few words, and though she did not understand his language, the tone was not unkind. He gestured toward the small encampment he had prepared, a modest space that seemed both foreign and strangely protective. As they walked together, Clara noticed the desert stretching endlessly around them, a landscape of sand, rocks, and distant mountains. The wind whispered through the sparse vegetation, carrying the scent of sagebrush and dust. It was beautiful, yet it felt like a prison, vast and lonely. That night, as the stars blazed in the clear desert sky, Clara lay on a simple bed of animal hides. Sleep did not come easily. Every sound, the rustle of the wind, the distant call of an owl made her heart race. She thought of her family, of the home she had known all her life, and of the life that now seemed impossibly far away. Fear mingled with wonder. She had been traded for a horse, yet there was something almost sacred in the quiet strength of the warrior who now shared her nights. His presence was commanding, yet there was a restraint in him, an unspoken rule that he would not harm her unless the world demanded it. Over the following days, Clara began to notice small acts of care. He shared his food with her, showed her how to move quietly through the desert, and observed her closely, correcting her gently when she struggled with tasks she had never known before. Slowly, the fear that had once overwhelmed her began to mix with something else: respect. She realized that he was not cruel, merely solitary. He had lived a life shaped by hardship, and his silence was not indifference but a reflection of experience. Each lesson he taught, each gesture of protection, became a small thread weaving a new kind of trust between them. Clara's fear did not vanish overnight. The nights were still long, and she often woke to the cold desert wind or to the sound of distant animals. But the loneliness that had once seemed unbearable began to feel different. She was not alone in the sense that she had been in her family home. Here, in this harsh and foreign land, she was part of a rhythm she did not yet fully understand. She began to notice the stars and the way the desert changed color at dawn. She began to understand, in a small and careful way, the warrior's connection to the land, the respect he carried for its dangers, and the unspoken bond he seemed willing to extend to her. By the end of the first month, Clara was no longer just a frightened girl taken in a trade. She was a student of the desert, learning lessons that could not be taught in any home. She had discovered the limits of her own courage, the strength she did not know she possessed, and the beginnings of understanding for the man who had become her unexpected guardian. Their days together were quiet and measured, their nights long and reflective, and through it all, Clara felt the slow shaping of a new life, one born from fear but growing into resilience and cautious hope. The first part of her story ended not with triumph but with survival. She had been given away at 18, traded for a horse, yet she had faced the unknown and remained unbroken. The desert around her was wide and empty, but within its vastness, Clara began to carve a place for herself. She did not yet know the challenges that lay ahead, nor the depth of connection she would form with the solitary warrior who had taken her in. But in the quiet nights under the endless sky, she discovered the first whispers of strength, courage, and the strange, undeniable pull of a life she had never imagined, but was now determined to endure. The first few nights with Takoda had been the hardest for Clara. The desert, which had once seemed only vast and empty, now felt alive with danger. Every sound, from the whisper of the wind to the distant call of coyotes, made her heart race. At first, she could not sleep. She stayed awake on the thin bed of hides, staring at the stars overhead, wondering what her life had become. But over time, she began to notice the small ways in which Takoda cared for her, even without speaking. He was quiet, rarely offering words, but his actions spoke volumes. He brought her water in the early morning before the sun rose, carefully choosing the freshest from the nearby stream. He showed her how to tie knots that would keep their small camp secure and how to recognize tracks in the sand, not just of animals, but of people who might be near. Each lesson was small, but Clara could see that he was teaching her how to survive, not just live, in the desert. Slowly she began to trust him. At first, Clara's fear of him was constant. She remembered the first night, lying awake as he sat a few feet away, silent and still, a shadow beneath the moonlight. She had been terrified, imagining all the ways things could go wrong. But then she realized that he was not cruel. Takoda's eyes might have been dark and unreadable, but they carried a certain calm, a quiet strength that seemed to promise protection. He was watching, yes, but not to harm her. He was watching to ensure she was safe. Days in the desert were long and grueling. Clara learned to rise before dawn to help with chores. She carried water and gathered firewood, sometimes moving quietly behind Takoda as he scouted the surrounding land. At first, the work was exhausting, and her hands blistered from tasks she had never done before. But she discovered a resilience within herself she had not known existed. The desert demanded strength, and slowly, Clara began to meet its demands. Each day she survived, each night she rested beneath the stars, she felt a small sense of pride. Evenings were the hardest. As the sun dipped below the horizon, the temperature dropped, and the vast desert seemed to stretch endlessly in every direction. Clara would sit near the fire, trying to keep warm, while Takoda tended to his weapons or repaired his clothing. Sometimes he would gesture for her to come closer, or hand her a small piece of food. These simple acts were more comforting than she could explain. She began to notice the rhythm of his movements, the way he listened to the wind and the animals, and the careful way he handled even the smallest tasks. Slowly, she realized that he had been shaped by this land, just as much as she was learning to be. One night, as they sat by the fire, Takoda finally spoke more than a word or two. He told her, in halting English mixed with gestures, about the desert, about survival, and about the animals they shared the land with. He did not speak of himself, not yet, but his lessons carried an unspoken story. Clara listened carefully, realizing that each word was chosen with thought. There was no rush in his voice, no desire to overwhelm her. It was as if he was teaching her not only how to survive, but how to understand the world around her in a way she never had before. At first, Clara had resisted learning from him. She was proud, stubborn, and frightened, and she wanted to cling to the memories of her old life. But the desert was relentless. Without his guidance, she would not have lasted. Slowly, she allowed herself to follow his instructions, to trust in his knowledge, and to pay attention to the patterns of the land. She learned how to find the best water, how to track animals for food, and how to move quietly so as not to attract danger. Every small success built her confidence. She was no longer just surviving, she was learning to live. The nights remained long and lonely, but they were no longer filled only with fear. Clara began to notice Takoda's quiet attention. He would sit near her while she slept, making sure she was safe from the dangers of the desert. He shared his fire with her, teaching her how to prepare small meals over the coals. When Clara struggled to understand his gestures or instructions, he would patiently repeat them, never raising his voice, never showing frustration. Slowly she began to see that this solitary warrior, whom she had once feared, could be trusted. As the days passed, a subtle bond began to form between them. It was not spoken, not yet, but it grew in shared glances, small gestures, and the quiet understanding that they depended on each other for survival. Clara began to see the humanity behind Takoda's stoic exterior. She noticed how he watched the skies for signs of weather, how he respected the animals they hunted, and how he seemed to feel a deep connection to the land itself. These small observations made her feel closer to him, even if she did not fully understand why. Clara also began to reflect on herself. She realized that the fear which had once consumed her was slowly changing into something more complex. She respected Takoda, yes, but she also began to feel gratitude. He had taken her in, protected her, and taught her the ways of a world that was new and frightening. She was learning not only about survival, but also about courage and resilience. Each day brought challenges, yet she found herself growing stronger, more capable, and more aware of her own abilities. Their life together was not easy. The desert could be unforgiving, and there were days when food was scarce or the heat unbearable. Clara often felt the sting of the sun and the chill of the night, but Takoda's guidance kept her safe. He was a silent teacher, showing her the importance of patience, observation, and caution. She learned to move without making noise, to read the signs of animals and weather, and to trust her instincts. Every skill she acquired made her feel more confident and more connected to the world around her. Yet, despite the hardships, there were moments of beauty. Clara began to notice the small wonders of the desert, the colors of the sky at dawn, the delicate flowers that bloomed unexpectedly among the rocks, and the quiet songs of birds hidden in the brush. Takoda would sometimes point these things out, almost as if he wanted her to see what he had always seen. In these moments, Clara felt a sense of peace she had never known in her old life. The desert, which had once seemed threatening and lonely, began to reveal its secrets to her. Clara also began to understand the complexity of Takoda's character. He was not unkind, but he was cautious. He did not speak of his past, nor did he easily reveal his emotions. Yet through his actions, Clara could see his integrity, his loyalty, and his quiet sense of honor. She realized that his solitude was not cruelty but a choice, shaped by experiences she could only guess at. Slowly, she began to respect him not only as her protector, but as a man shaped by a harsh and demanding world. By the end of the second month, Clara's fear had softened into cautious trust. She still missed her family and her old life, but she had learned to survive, and she had begun to see the warrior who had taken her in as more than a figure of fear. She was beginning to understand him, to anticipate his gestures, and to recognize the unspoken bond that was growing between them. Nights were still long, but they were no longer filled solely with dread. She felt a quiet sense of security in his presence, and a growing awareness of her own strength and resilience. Clara's journey in those first weeks and months had been one of transformation. She had been given away at 18, traded for a horse, and placed in a world that was frightening and unfamiliar. Yet, through hardship, observation, and small lessons, she was beginning to carve out a new life for herself. The fear that had once dominated her heart was now tempered by respect, trust, and a growing sense of personal strength. She was no longer simply a girl caught in circumstances beyond her control. She was becoming a young woman capable of navigating the complexities of a harsh and beautiful world. As the stars stretched across the desert sky each night, Clara often found herself thinking about the life she had left behind. She wondered what her family was doing, whether they missed her, and whether they understood the changes she was undergoing. But she also realized that she could not dwell on the past. Survival demanded her attention, and Takoda's guidance provided a path forward. With each passing day, she felt a little stronger, a little wiser, and a little more in tune with the rhythms of the desert and the man who had become her teacher, her protector. And in ways she was only beginning to understand, her companion. By the time the second month ended, Clara had settled into a rhythm. The mornings, afternoons, and evenings were filled with work, observation, and learning. The nights were quieter, marked by small conversations and shared silences. Takoda's presence was no longer frightening, it was steadying. Clara felt a growing sense of belonging, not to a family or a home she had known, but to the desert itself, and to the warrior who had taught her to see and respect it. In this harsh and unexpected world, Clara had begun to discover her own courage, her own resilience, and the beginnings of a bond that would shape the rest of her life. By the third month, Clara had grown stronger, both in body and in mind. The desert, which had once felt like a vast and unwelcoming prison, had become a place she could navigate with increasing confidence. Every day, Takoda continued to teach her the skills she needed to survive. She learned to track animals, recognizing footprints in the sand and the faint disturbances in vegetation that indicated a passing deer or coyote. She learned which plants could be eaten, which could be used for medicine, and which were best avoided entirely. Each lesson deepened her connection to the land, and with it, her understanding of Takoda's way of life. Riding was one of the most challenging lessons. Clara had grown up helping on her family's small farm, but she had never been taught to ride at speed or to control a horse in difficult terrain. Takoda watched her patiently as she mounted the horse, guiding her hands and correcting her posture with gentle gestures. At first, her attempts were clumsy. The horse balked, she lost her balance, and fear often overtook her determination, but Takoda never scolded her. Instead, he demonstrated the techniques himself, moving gracefully and confidently across the rough desert landscape, and then allowed Clara to try again. Slowly, she began to feel the rhythm of the horse beneath her and the wind brushing her face. Riding became not only a skill, but also a symbol of her growing independence. Hunting was another lesson that tested her patience and focus. Takoda taught her how to move quietly, how to watch the behavior of animals, and how to aim with precision when the moment arrived. The first time Clara successfully hunted a small animal on her own, she felt a surge of pride and self-reliance. She realized that she was no longer completely dependent on Takoda for food. Each successful hunt strengthened her confidence, even as it reminded her of the harsh realities of life in the desert. Takoda watched silently, but his eyes held a quiet approval that Clara had begun to understand. In these months, Clara also started to understand more about Takoda himself, even though he spoke little of his past. She noticed the way he moved through the desert, how he seemed to anticipate changes in weather, and how he treated animals with a respect that was almost reverent. There was a quiet discipline in everything he did, a sense of honor that extended even to the smallest tasks. He did not talk about his family or whether he had ever had one, but Clara began to sense the weight of loss in his actions. He carried himself with a solitary strength, but also with a subtle tenderness that only appeared in the smallest gestures directed toward her. At night, the fire became their center of life. Clara would sit close, feeling the warmth against the cool desert air, while Takoda tended to the fire and prepared simple meals. Sometimes he would gesture toward the sky, showing her constellations she had never learned to identify. He taught her to notice the subtle changes in the wind and the desert sounds that indicated approaching storms or the presence of other people. Clara began to see that every lesson was a lesson in awareness, in observation, and in respect for the world around her. These skills would keep her alive, and slowly she began to appreciate the depth of knowledge Takoda possessed. Despite their growing routine, Clara still faced moments of doubt and fear. She missed the comfort of her family and the predictability of her old life. She wondered whether she would ever be able to leave the desert, or if she was destined to live permanently in this new, harsh world. Yet, each day she overcame a challenge. Each lesson learned or obstacle navigated reinforced her resilience. She began to see that survival was not just about strength or endurance, but about patience, adaptability, and courage. Clara also began to notice a change in her feelings toward Takoda. Fear, which had once been constant, was giving way to a complicated mix of respect, gratitude, and curiosity. She watched the way he interacted with the land, the animals, and even the rare travelers they encountered. His quiet confidence and calm demeanor impressed her, and she found herself paying close attention to his actions, trying to understand him. There were moments, brief and fleeting, when their hands would brush, or their eyes would meet, and Clara felt an unspoken connection growing between them. She did not yet understand the depth of it, but she felt it in her chest like a slow-burning fire. One day they faced a real test. While tracking a small herd of deer, they stumbled upon signs of a rival group passing through the area. Takoda immediately became alert, signaling Clara to stay low and silent. He moved with precision and caution, guiding her through the terrain so they could avoid detection. Clara followed his instructions carefully, her heart pounding, realizing that one wrong move could have put them in grave danger. The tension of the moment was intense, yet she felt a sense of calm in knowing that Takoda had the knowledge and skill to protect them. That day, she began to understand that survival was not just about individual skill, but about trust and teamwork. Through these experiences, Clara also learned the importance of observation and intuition. She noticed subtle signs in the desert, the way a bird suddenly took flight, the shifting shadows on the sand, or the faint tracks left behind by passing travelers. Each observation became a lesson, teaching her to anticipate danger, to plan ahead, and to respond quickly when necessary. She began to rely on her own judgment as much as she relied on Takoda, and with each passing day, she felt her confidence grow. Even in moments of quiet, Clara learned lessons about patience and endurance. Takoda often sat silently for hours, simply watching the land, listening to the wind, and observing the animals. At first, Clara found these long periods of stillness frustrating and uncomfortable. But slowly, she began to appreciate them. She realized that these moments were about more than idleness. They were about learning to read the world, to understand its patterns, and to recognize the delicate balance of life in the desert. These lessons would stay with her forever, shaping the way she moved through the world. As Clara grew more skilled and confident, the bond between her and Takoda deepened, though it remained largely unspoken. They relied on each other for survival, yes, but they also began to share small moments of connection. A gesture of handing her a piece of food, a glance that acknowledged a shared understanding, or a silent sit by the fire all contributed to a growing sense of trust. Clara began to see Takoda not only as her protector, but as a teacher, a companion, and someone who understood the desert as intimately as she was beginning to. The transformation in Clara was profound. She was no longer the frightened girl who had been traded at 18 for a horse. She had become someone who could navigate the desert with skill, who could hunt and gather food, and who could anticipate danger before it arrived. Her respect for Takoda had grown, as had her understanding of the complexities of life in a harsh environment. She realized that fear and courage could coexist, and that survival required both strength and intelligence. By the end of the 3rd month, Clara had settled into a rhythm of life that was challenging but deeply rewarding. She had learned to appreciate the small victories, to find beauty in the desert's harshness, and to recognize her own capacity for resilience. She had also begun to sense that Takoda, despite his stoic exterior, valued her presence and trusted her abilities. Their shared experiences had created a foundation of mutual respect and understanding, and though words remained limited, their bond was becoming increasingly meaningful. Clara often thought about the future, wondering what it might hold. She knew that life in the desert would always be unpredictable, that danger could arrive at any moment, and that challenges would continue to test her. But she also knew that she was stronger than she had ever imagined. She had faced fear, learned new skills, and developed a connection with a man who had taught her not only to survive, but to understand the world in a way she never had before. Clara's journey was far from over, but she felt ready to face whatever came next, knowing that she carried with her the lessons, the strength, and the quiet bond that had grown in the heart of the desert. Life in the desert had begun to feel both familiar and unpredictable too. Clara. She had grown accustomed to the rhythm of each day, rising with the first light of dawn, tending to the camp, practicing her riding and hunting skills, and observing Takoda as he moved with silent precision through the vast, sun-scorched land. Yet, even with all the skills she had learned, the desert remained a place of constant danger, and Clara knew that no amount of preparation could make her completely safe. She had come to understand that life in this world demanded courage, quick thinking, and a trust in those who could guide her. One day, as they traveled toward a small water source Takoda had marked on an old map, Clara noticed a series of tracks she had not seen before. They were fresh and unfamiliar, suggesting a group had passed this way recently. Takoda's posture changed subtly, his eyes narrowing as he scanned the horizon. Clara felt a sudden, sharp pang of fear. She realized that this could be dangerous. These strangers might not be friendly, and their arrival could threaten everything she had learned to depend on. She glanced at Takoda, whose calm and controlled movements reassured her in a way words never could. She knew that, no matter what happened, he would guide her through it. As they followed the tracks cautiously, Takoda's gestures were precise and urgent. Clara learned to move silently behind him, matching his pace and copying the careful, deliberate steps he took. The desert, which had once seemed like a place of endless open space, now felt like a landscape filled with hidden threats. She realized that survival depended not only on skill and awareness, but on trust in herself and in Takoda. Each step she took alongside him strengthened her confidence, even as her pulse raced with the anticipation of what lay ahead. Suddenly, a disturbance in the sand ahead caught Takoda's attention. He raised a hand, signaling Clara to stop. From behind a low ridge, a group of men appeared, armed and clearly not part of the peaceful travelers they sometimes encountered. Clara's heart pounded, and she felt a moment of sheer terror, but Takoda did not panic. Instead, he gestured for Clara to follow him carefully along a hidden path, moving in such a way that they remained mostly out of sight. Clara felt a mixture of fear and admiration. This was the same man she had once feared, yet now she relied on him completely, trusting his judgment in a life-threatening moment. They watched from a distance as the men moved through the desert, their intentions unclear. Clara's hands shook slightly, but she reminded herself of everything Takoda had taught her, the importance of observation, patience, and remaining calm under pressure. She noticed subtle details in their movements, how they held their weapons, the way they scanned the horizon, and the tension in their bodies. Takoda's eyes flicked to her, giving a small nod, and she knew that he trusted her to pay attention, to learn from the situation as much as he had taught her to survive the physical challenges of the desert. Hours passed in tense silence. Clara could feel the heat of the sun on her skin and the sand beneath her hands, but her focus remained sharp. She began to understand the true meaning of Takoda's teachings. Survival was not just about hunting or riding. It was about awareness, strategy, and understanding human behavior. The lessons she had learned over the past months were being tested in a way she had never imagined. She had come a long way from the frightened girl who had been traded at 18 for a horse. Now, she was a young woman capable of observing, analyzing, and responding to danger with a careful mind. Eventually, the men moved on, unaware of Clara and Takoda's presence. She exhaled a long, quiet breath, feeling a mixture of relief and exhaustion. Takoda did not speak immediately. He simply guided her back to a more secure area, gesturing for her to rest and recover. Clara sat by the fire that evening, feeling the tension of the day slowly leave her body. She realized that these moments of danger, though frightening, were teaching her more than any calm day in the desert ever could. She felt a deeper respect for Takoda, understanding that his silence and precision were born from years of experience and loss. That night under the stars, Clara reflected on her journey. She realized that her bond with Takoda had grown in ways she could not fully describe. Fear had given way to trust, and trust had begun to evolve into something more complex, a recognition of shared strength and mutual dependence. She noticed the way he watched over her even in moments of quiet, how he ensured she had enough food, water, and rest, and how he subtly encouraged her to rely on her own judgment. In these small acts, she saw not only protection but respect, a recognition of her growing abilities and her place in this harsh world. Over the following days, Clara began to notice changes within herself. Her confidence in riding and hunting had grown, and she moved with a quiet determination that reflected her experiences. She was learning not only to survive but to thrive, understanding the desert's rhythms and the lessons it offered. At the same time, her understanding of Takoda deepened. She realized that his solitude was not indifference but choice, shaped by loss and the harsh realities of the land. His quiet strength was a shield, not a wall, and Clara felt herself drawn to it in a way that transcended fear. One afternoon, as they traveled along a ridge overlooking a wide valley, Clara stumbled slightly and nearly fell. Takoda's hand was immediately there, steadying her with a grip that was firm yet gentle. In that instant, she felt a surge of emotion she could not name. It was gratitude, respect, and something warmer, something that made her heart beat faster even as she tried to remain composed. She realized that she was no longer just learning from him. She was learning alongside him, and their lives were intertwined in ways that were quiet, subtle, and profound. Their journey that day was not without its challenges. A sudden storm swept across the desert, bringing wind, rain, and lightning. Clara had never experienced such intense weather, and for a moment, fear threatened to overwhelm her. But Takoda guided her to a sheltered spot, showing her how to secure their belongings and protect themselves from the elements. She watched him work with precision, his movements calm and confident, and she realized that she was learning to remain composed even when the world around her seemed chaotic. The storm became another lesson in patience, resilience, and trust. By the end of the 4th month, Clara had begun to see a different side of life in the desert. She understood that danger and beauty existed side by side, that moments of fear could teach strength, and that the bond between her and Takoda was growing stronger with each shared experience. She had learned to rely on her own skills while trusting in his guidance, and she felt a sense of empowerment that had been completely foreign to her just months earlier. She was no longer simply surviving. She was living with awareness, courage, and growing confidence in herself and in the man who had become her protector. As night fell, they sat by the fire together, the stars stretching endlessly above. Takoda handed Clara a small piece of bread, his gesture simple but meaningful. She accepted it with a quiet smile, feeling the warmth of connection that had grown over months of shared experience. In that moment, Clara realized that she was no longer the girl who had been traded at 18. She was a young woman who had faced fear, learned new skills, and developed a deep understanding of herself, and the man who had guided her through one of the most challenging periods of her life. The desert, once a place of isolation and fear, had become a place of transformation. Clara had learned resilience, courage, and the importance of trust. She had faced danger, adapted to harsh conditions, and begun to understand the complexities of human relationships in a world where survival often required both skill and intuition. Takoda had taught her more than survival. He had shown her the strength of quiet courage, the value of observation, and the power of shared experience. By the end of this period, Clara knew that her life had changed irrevocably. She had moved from fear to trust, from dependence to growing independence, and from isolation to a deep, unspoken bond with Takoda. Their nights together were no longer simply endured. They were shared in a way that reflected mutual respect and understanding. Clara had grown into a young woman capable of navigating the challenges of the desert, and of recognizing the profound lessons embedded in each experience. She understood that the journey was far from over. There would be more challenges, more dangers, and more moments that would test her courage and her trust. But Clara also understood that she had grown stronger, more aware, and more capable than she had ever imagined. She was no longer simply a girl given away for a horse. She was a survivor, a learner, and someone beginning to understand the depth of human connection forged in the most unexpected circumstances. The desert had become a teacher, and Clara had become its student. Over the months, she had learned to ride, to hunt, to read the signs of the land, and to anticipate danger. Every lesson Takoda had given her had shaped her into someone stronger, more aware, and more capable than she had ever imagined. Yet in this final stage of her journey, Clara discovered that the greatest lesson was not in survival alone. It was in understanding herself and the bond she had formed with Takoda. By now, Clara could move through the desert with confidence. She could spot animal tracks hours old, read the shifts in the wind, and recognize the subtle signs of other humans nearby. Her hands were steady, her instincts sharp, and her courage had been tested in ways that transformed her from a frightened girl into a capable young woman. She had learned to respect the land, to trust her own judgment, and to rely on the guidance of the man who had become her constant companion. Takoda's teachings had been more than practical skills. They had been lessons in resilience, patience, and awareness. Their days continued in the rhythm they had established. Mornings were for tending to tasks and scouting the land. Afternoons were for hunting, preparing food, and sharing stories through gestures and simple words. Evenings were quiet and reflective, with the fire casting warm light across the desert sand and the stars stretching endlessly above. Each night, Clara felt a sense of calm she had never known in her old life. The fear that had once consumed her had been replaced by trust, not only in Takoda but in herself. She had discovered that she could endure hardships, make decisions under pressure, and survive in an environment that had once seemed impossible. As Clara's confidence grew, so did her awareness of Takoda. She began to notice the smallest details: the way his eyes softened when he watched the desert at dawn, the careful attention he paid to the horses, and the subtle way he checked her safety without drawing attention to it. These quiet moments revealed the depth of his character, and Clara felt a growing sense of connection. Their relationship had evolved far beyond teacher and student or protector and protected. It was a bond forged in shared struggle, mutual respect, and the unspoken understanding that they depended on each other in ways neither could have imagined before. One evening, a sudden storm swept across the desert. Dark clouds rolled in quickly, and wind tore across the sand, forcing them to take shelter behind a rocky outcrop. Rain began to fall in heavy sheets, soaking the ground and chilling the air. Clara's first instinct was panic, but Takoda's calm presence reminded her to focus and act with intention. Together, they secured their belongings, built a small fire to stay warm, and waited out the storm. In those hours, Clara realized that she no longer panicked at danger. She had learned to remain calm, assess the situation, and take action, skills that were now deeply ingrained within her. After the storm passed, the desert sparkled with life. Small streams formed where the rain had fallen, and the scent of wet earth and sagebrush filled the air. Clara felt a deep sense of wonder, recognizing that the desert, though harsh, held moments of extraordinary beauty. Takoda gestured toward the small flowers that had sprung from the rain-soaked ground, and for the first time, Clara felt a smile of genuine joy spread across her face. It was a reminder that survival was not only about endurance, but also about noticing and appreciating the quiet miracles around her. As time went on, Clara and Takoda's bond grew stronger. Their shared experiences had created a sense of trust that required no words. Takoda taught her not only to survive, but also to navigate the emotional challenges of isolation and fear. He showed her how to take pride in her accomplishments, how to remain humble in victory, and how to approach danger with courage and clear thinking. Clara realized that the warrior's strength was not only in his skill, but also in his ability to teach, protect, and inspire. She felt gratitude for everything he had given her, not just safety and knowledge, but the opportunity to discover her own capabilities. There were moments of quiet intimacy, simple gestures that spoke volumes. Takoda would hand her food without speaking, offer a reassuring glance when danger seemed near, or adjust her riding posture to ensure her comfort and safety. Clara learned to notice these signs and to respond in kind, understanding that communication did not always require words. Their connection deepened, built on shared experiences and mutual reliance. Clara found herself caring for him as he cared for her, recognizing his sacrifices, his vigilance, and the wisdom he had imparted. One day, as they rode across a wide canyon, Clara realized how far she had come. She rode with confidence, guiding her horse alongside Takoda's, navigating difficult terrain with skill and ease. She remembered the frightened girl who had arrived in the desert months ago, unsure of her place in the world, and she felt a quiet pride. She had endured fear, learned new skills, and grown stronger with each challenge. The desert had transformed her, and in that transformation, she had discovered a resilience and independence she had never known before. Evenings by the fire became a time for reflection. Clara thought about her family, her past life, and the journey she had undertaken. She realized that, although she had been given away at 18 and traded for a horse, she had gained something far more profound, a life filled with lessons, growth, and connection. She had learned courage, patience, and awareness, and she had discovered the depth of human bonds in the most unexpected circumstances. The desert, which had once seemed a harsh and lonely place, had become a home of knowledge, strength, and understanding. Clara also recognized the change within herself. She had become more patient, more observant, and more capable of understanding the subtleties of human behavior. She had learned to trust her instincts and to act decisively when the situation demanded it. Her confidence in herself grew alongside her trust in Takoda. She understood that she was no longer simply surviving. She was thriving, navigating the complexities of the desert, the people they encountered, and the relationship she shared with Takoda. The nights spent under the stars were no longer moments of fear or uncertainty. They had become times of quiet companionship, where Clara and Takoda shared the warmth of the fire, observed the constellations, and communicated in ways that transcended words. Clara felt a profound sense of security and connection, understanding that they had forged a partnership based on respect, shared experience, and trust. In these moments, she felt the culmination of all she had learned, the courage, the skills, and the understanding that had grown within her during her time in the desert. Clara realized that she had been transformed not only by the lessons of survival, but also by the bond she shared with Takoda. She understood that strength was not only physical, but also emotional and mental. She had learned to navigate fear, to act with courage, and to trust in the guidance of someone who had become more than a teacher or protector. Their relationship had evolved into a connection defined by respect, understanding, and mutual reliance, a bond that had grown quietly, steadily, and profoundly over months of shared experience. By the end of her journey in the desert, Clara had fully embraced her transformation. She was no longer the frightened girl traded at 18. She was a young woman of courage, skill, and understanding. She had learned to navigate the world with confidence, to survive its challenges, and to recognize the depth of human connection. Takoda had taught her more than survival. He had shown her the strength of quiet courage, the importance of observation, and the power of shared experience. Clara felt a sense of empowerment she had never imagined possible. In the quiet of the desert beneath the endless sky, Clara found a sense of peace. She understood that life would always hold challenges, but she had the skills, the knowledge, and the inner strength to face them. She had grown resilient, capable, and self-aware. Her bond with Takoda had given her more than protection. It had given her confidence, understanding, and the ability to trust both herself and another person deeply. She had survived fear, embraced the lessons of the desert, and discovered the profound power of human connection. As they sat together one final evening by the fire, Clara reflected on her journey. She felt gratitude for the hardships, for the lessons, and for the warrior who had guided her. She understood that her life had been irrevocably changed, that she had been shaped by experiences that had tested her courage and resilience. And she realized that she had grown into a woman who could face the unknown with strength, wisdom, and grace. A woman who had discovered not only survival, but also the depth of trust and connection that could exist between two people in the harshest of worlds. Clara's story in the desert had reached a turning point, not an end. She had learned that survival was not just about enduring challenges, but about growing through them. She had discovered the power of patience, observation, courage, and trust. And she had found in the companionship of Takoda a bond that transcended fear and transformed it into respect, understanding, and quiet affection. She was no longer a girl traded for a horse. She was a woman who had faced the harshest realities of life and emerged stronger, wiser, and deeply aware of her own strength and the strength of those she trusted. In that moment, Clara understood something she had never known before. True strength comes not only from surviving the world's hardships, but from embracing them, learning from them, and allowing them to shape you into someone greater. She had endured fear, embraced the desert, and forged a connection with Takoda that had transformed her life. And in that transformation, she had discovered the courage, resilience, and understanding that would guide her for the rest of her days.